Growing up, I don't think anyone in my family ever outright said Lauren was the favorite, but it didn't take a genius to figure it out. She was everything you'd expect from a golden child, captain of the swim team, straight A's, homecoming queen, the works. If there was a way to be perfect, Lauren was already 10 steps ahead. Meanwhile, I was just there. Not bad, not great. Just Ryan. Our house was like a shrine to her achievements. Trophies lined the living room shelves, her school photos hung in every hallway, and there was even a newspaper clipping of her winning some regional swim meet pinned to the fridge. My stuff? If it didn't end up shoved in a drawer somewhere, it probably got thrown out during one of Mom's spring cleaning frenzies. I still remember the day I realized how deep the favoritism ran. I was about 10, and I just won first place in the school science fair. I was so excited. I'd built a solar-powered car from scratch, staying up late for weeks to get it just right. My teacher said it was one of the best projects she'd ever seen. I came home clutching my little plastic trophy, practically bouncing with excitement. Mom, Dad, look what I didn't even get to finish the sentence. Oh, that's great, honey, Mom said, barely glancing up from her phone. Dad nodded absent-mindedly, muttering something about how I'd always been good with that science stuff. Then Lauren walked in, holding a medal from her latest swim meet. Instantly, Mom and Dad lit up. Lauren, sweetheart, another win. Let's take a picture. Dad grabbed his phone while Mom gushed over how talented she was. My trophy sat forgotten on the counter, right next to a stack of unopened mail. I took it to my room and put it on the dresser, where it stayed for a week before Mom decided the clutter was ruining her decor. She moved it to a box in the attic, next to some of my old soccer participation ribbons. Things like that happened all the time. No matter what I did, it never felt like enough to earn their attention, let alone their praise. I wasn't failing school, I wasn't getting into trouble, I was just quietly doing my best, and somehow that made me invisible. At family gatherings, it was even worse. Every conversation revolved around Lauren. My relatives fawned over her like she was the second coming. Lauren's so accomplished, Aunt Beth would say. I just know she's going to be a star. Sometimes they'd look at me out of obligation. And how's school, Ryan? It's fine, I'd mumble, knowing they'd already tuned out before I could elaborate. The worst part was that I started to believe it. Maybe I really wasn't good enough. Maybe being ignored was just my place in the family. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was wrong with me. The only person who didn't make me feel like an afterthought was Aunt Valerie. She wasn't my real aunt, just an old family friend who'd been around since before I was born. Valerie had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room, even when everyone else was too busy to notice. At one of those endless family barbecues, I was hiding behind the garage, flipping through a book I'd borrowed from the library. It was some sci-fi novel about a kid who built robots to save his town. I was so engrossed I didn't hear Valerie coming until she plopped down beside me. "What's that you're reading?" she asked, tilting her head to see the cover. I held it up, expecting her to dismiss it like most adults did when I talked about my interests. But she didn't. "That sounds fascinating," she said. "You've always had such a creative mind, Ryan. I love that about you." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. I didn't know how to respond, so I just mumbled, "Thanks," and stared at the ground. She smiled and patted my shoulder. "Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough, okay? You're going to do amazing things someday." It was a small moment, but it stuck with me. Valerie didn't care about swim meets or grades or trophies. She cared about me. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to compete to be seen. But no matter how much I treasured those moments with her, they didn't change the bigger picture. I was still just the other kid in my own family. Lauren's shadow stretched long, and I was trapped in it, trying to figure out how to find my own light. When high school started, I thought things might be different. A new school, new teachers, and a fresh start. I let myself hope for just a second that maybe I could finally step out of Lauren's shadow. That lasted about a day. By second period, it felt like the entire school already knew who I was. "Oh, you're Lauren's little brother," my English teacher said with a wide smile as she handed me the syllabus. She was such a joy to have in class. In gym, the coach pulled me aside during roll call. "Lauren was one of our best swimmers. You planning to join the team too?" No, sir, I said, trying not to sound annoyed. I didn't even like swimming. It was like that everywhere I went. Every teacher, every coach, every classmate, they all compared me to her. It didn't matter what I did or how hard I tried. I wasn't Ryan. I was just Lauren's little brother. The worst part was, I wasn't even bad at school. I wasn't a star athlete or a social butterfly, but I was smart. I got good grades, I worked hard, and I even joined the debate team, where I discovered I had a knack for public speaking. But none of that seemed to matter. I'll never forget my sophomore year history project. It was this massive assignment on the civil rights movement, and I'd spent weeks researching, writing, and piecing everything together. When I got it back, there was a big red at the top, and my teacher had written, "Excellent work, Ryan. You have a real talent for this." For a moment, I felt on top of the world. I rushed home, eager to show my parents. Mom was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, and Dad was watching TV. "Hey, check this out," I said, holding up the graded paper. "That's nice, honey," Mom said without looking up. "Good job, kiddo," Dad added, not even glancing away from the screen. I stood there for a moment, waiting for, I don't know, something. A follow-up question, a bit of excitement, anything. But nothing came. Then Mom said, "Oh, did you hear? Lauren's coach thinks she has a real shot at the state championships this year. Isn't that exciting?" And just like that, my little moment of pride was gone. By junior year, I'd stopped trying to share my accomplishments with them. What was the point? If it wasn't about Lauren, they didn't care. Instead, I poured everything I had into school. I studied late into the night, joined more clubs, and started thinking about colleges. Anything to build a future where I didn't have to depend on their approval. The only person who seemed to notice my efforts was, once again, Aunt Valerie. Every few weeks, she called to check in. "How's school going, Ryan? Any new projects you're working on?" I told her about debate tournaments, essays I was proud of, and the colleges I was thinking of applying to. She listened like it was the most fascinating thing in the world, even though I knew she probably had no idea what half of it meant. "You're going places," she'd say. "I can feel it. Just keep going, and don't let anyone hold you back." Her belief in me was the only thing that kept me going some days. But even with her support, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much I accomplished, it would never be enough for my parents. That feeling hit me hard during my senior year when college acceptance letters started rolling in. I'd applied to a few schools, including one with a great business program. The day the acceptance letter came, I felt like I was floating. I ran downstairs, clutching the envelope. "I got into Northern State," I said, grinning from ear to ear. Mom looked up from the couch, where she was watching some home renovation show. "That's great, honey," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dad nodded. "Good for you." And that was it. No celebration, no excitement, nothing. Later that night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "Do you think Lauren's job will let her take time off to come to Ryan's graduation?" Mom asked. "I doubt it," Dad replied. "She's so busy these days. Besides, it's not like it's a big deal. He's just going to state school." I stood there in the hallway, my chest tightening with every word. Just going to state school. Like everything I'd worked for meant nothing. That was the moment I realized I was done chasing their approval. It didn't matter what I did. It would never be enough. So I decided then and there that I wasn't going to live my life for them anymore. From now on, I was doing this for me. When I left for college, I didn't expect a grand send-off. My parents didn't even come with me to move into the dorms. Dad said he was too busy with work, and Mom stayed home to help Lauren pack for some business trip. Aunt Valerie was the one who drove me. She helped me carry boxes up to my room, insisted on making my bed before she left, and handed me a bag of homemade cookies with a tearful smile. "You're going to do amazing here, Ryan," she said, hugging me tightly. "Don't forget that." Her belief in me was the only thing that made the whole experience feel real. As I watched her drive away, I stood in the middle of the bustling campus and let the reality sink in. For the first time in my life, I was on my own. The first few weeks were overwhelming. My roommate, Matt, was loud, messy, and somehow always surrounded by a group of people who were just as chaotic as him. At first, I thought I'd hate living with him, But Matt turned out to be one of those guys who could make friends with anyone. He had this way of dragging people into his orbit, and before I knew it, I was getting pulled along with him. "Dude, you can't just sit in your room all day," he said one Friday night, tossing a hoodie at me. "There's a bonfire at the quad. Let's go." I wasn't really the bonfire type, but Matt didn't give me much of a choice. He introduced me to half the campus that night, and by the end of it, I actually felt like I belonged. It was a weird feeling, being surrounded by people who didn't know Lauren, who didn't compare me to her, who just saw me as Ryan. Classes were tough, but I loved them. I was majoring in business, and my professors actually seemed to care about what they were teaching. One of them, Dr. Patel, quickly became my favorite. He was no nonsense, but had this way of breaking down complex ideas that made everything click. During one of his lectures, he talked about how the best businesses start with solving a simple problem. "Find something people need," he said, pacing the front of the room, "and give it to them better than anyone else can." That idea stuck with me. In between classes and assignments, I started keeping a notebook where I jotted down ideas. Most of them were terrible, things like automated laundry service for dorms, or a better way to organize textbooks. But one idea kept coming back to me: food. The dining hall was terrible, and late at night, when I was cramming for exams or hanging out with friends, I'd always wish there was somewhere to grab a decent meal. It seemed so obvious. Why wasn't anyone doing this already? I mentioned it to Matt one night, and his eyes lit up. "Dude, that's genius. You should totally do it." "Do what?" "Start a late-night food delivery thing. You'd make a killing." I laughed it off at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I started doing research, talking to other students, and crunching numbers. It wasn't a full-blown plan yet, but it felt like the first step towards something real. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this fresh start. Dr. Patel noticed my dedication and started calling on me more in class. One day, after I aced a particularly tough exam, he pulled me aside. "You have a good head for this, Ryan," he said, handing me back my paper. "I hope you're thinking about what you want to do after college because I see a lot of potential in you." That single moment meant more to me than anything my parents had ever said. Back at home, things stayed the same. My parents rarely called, and when they did, it was mostly to talk about Lauren. I stopped expecting updates about her life to be followed by questions about mine. The few times I mentioned my classes or my plans, my mom would say, "That's nice, honey," before steering the conversation back to Lauren's latest promotion or her big trip to New York. I told Aunt Valerie about my late-night food idea during one of her visits. She listened intently, her face lighting up the way it always did when I shared something I was excited about. "I think it's brilliant," she said. "You've always had such a creative mind, Ryan. If anyone can make this work, it's you." Her encouragement gave me the push I needed to start taking the idea seriously. I began sketching out a business plan, working out the logistics, and even talking to a few friends about how we could make it happen. It wasn't just a pipe dream anymore. It was becoming something real. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally carving out a space for myself, completely separate from Lauren and my parents. And it felt incredible. By the time I graduated college, I had a solid plan for my late-night food delivery business. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get started. I'd saved up from part-time jobs, tutoring gigs, and a little extra help from Aunt Valerie. She never asked for anything in return. She just said, "This is your chance to do something great. I'm proud of you, Ryan." I moved back to my hometown after graduation and rented a tiny kitchen space in an old strip mall. It was cheap, close to campus, and perfect for the kind of operation I wanted to run. I called the business Night Bites and spent weeks setting everything up, designing a simple menu, sourcing ingredients, and hiring a couple of college students to help with deliveries. The first month was chaos. Orders trickled in slowly at first, but word spread fast. Within a few weeks, we were so busy I barely had time to breathe. I was working 16-hour days, bouncing between cooking, managing the schedule, and running deliveries when we were short-staffed. It was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. The first time I paid myself, I sat in the middle of my tiny office holding that check like it was a trophy. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but it was mine. I'd earned it. Things started to settle into a rhythm, and Night Bites quickly became a local favorite. Students loved it, especially during midterms and finals when late-night study sessions turned into all-nighters. I even started recognizing regulars when I dropped off orders. One guy, a senior named Brandon, joked that I'd probably saved his GPA with my buffalo chicken quesadillas. It wasn't long before my parents started hearing about the business. I hadn't told them much about it. I figured they wouldn't care, but apparently, some of their friends had kids who raved about night bites. Mom called me one afternoon, her voice unusually upbeat. "Ryan, sweetie, I heard about your little business. How exciting." "Thanks," I said cautiously, not sure where this was going. "We're so proud of you," she continued, the way someone might talk to a toddler who just learned to tie their shoes. "Your father and I were just saying how impressive it is that you've managed to make it work." "Uh-huh," I said, waiting for the catch. "Well," she said after a pause, "your sister's been having a tough time at work lately. Things aren't going as smoothly as she'd hoped, and we were wondering if you might have a position for her." There it was. I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. "You want Lauren to work for me?" "Just for a little while," Mom said quickly. "She's been so stressed, and we thought it might be good for her to have a change of pace." I wanted to say no. Every fiber of my being screamed against it. Lauren didn't need this job. She had my parents to fall back on, just like she always had. But I knew they wouldn't stop asking, and part of me was curious to see how she'd handle actually working for something instead of having it handed to her. "Fine," I said eventually, "but she's starting at the bottom, just like everyone else. No special treatment." When Lauren showed up for her first shift, she looked completely out of place in her designer jeans and perfectly styled hair. I gave her the standard training, how to take orders, prep deliveries, and manage customer complaints, but it was clear she wasn't taking it seriously. "Ryan," she said halfway through her first day, "do I really have to do all this? I thought I'd be helping with the big picture stuff." I laughed. "You're here to work, Lauren. That means taking orders, cleaning up, and making sure deliveries go out on time. Big picture stuff comes later, if you earn it." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. For a while, I thought maybe it would work. She wasn't great at the job, but she showed up, did what I asked, and kept her complaints to a minimum. But then she started slipping. She'd come in late, leave early, and spend half her shift scrolling through her phone. When I called her out on it, she brushed me off. "Relax, Ryan," she said one day after showing up 30 minutes late. "It's not like this is a real job." That hit a nerve. "It's real enough to pay the bills," I said sharply. "If you don't want to be here, then don't be here. But if you stay, you're going to do the work." She huffed and walked off, but she didn't quit. Not yet, anyway. Around the same time, my parents started calling more often. The conversations always started the same way, with polite questions about the business and how I was doing. But they inevitably circled back to Lauren. "How's she doing?" Mom would ask, her tone dripping with concern. "Is she settling in okay?" "She's fine," I'd say, keeping it short. "Well, you know, she's been under so much pressure lately. Be patient with her, okay? She's trying her best." That was the moment I realized nothing had changed. No matter how much I accomplished, no matter how hard I worked, Lauren would always come first in their eyes. And I was done trying to prove otherwise. Lauren lasted 2 months at Night Bites before she quit. She claimed it was because she needed to focus on her career. But we both knew the truth. She couldn't handle not being treated like royalty. I didn't beg her to stay. Frankly, I was relieved. The team worked smoother without her constant complaints and half-hearted effort. I thought her leaving would put an end to my parents' meddling, but it only made things worse. "Ryan," Mom said during one of her increasingly frequent calls, "your father and I need to talk to you about something important." Here we go again, I thought. "What is it, Mom?" "Well," she began, her voice dropping into that practiced tone she used when she was about to ask for something. "Things have been tight lately. The mortgage, the utilities, it's all adding up. We were hoping you could help us out." I sighed, already exhausted by the conversation. "I've been helping you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I send you money every month." "Yes, and we're so grateful for that," she said quickly. "But it's not enough. We were thinking, with how well your business is doing, maybe you could cover the mortgage for a while, just until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to pay your mortgage? It's not like we're asking for charity, Dad chimed in, his voice defensive. We've always been there for you, Ryan. This house is part of the family. Don't you want to help keep it? I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. They had never been there for me. Every ounce of support, every spare dollar, every word of praise, they had all gone to Lauren. And now, after years of neglecting me, they wanted me to bail them out? Let me think about it, I said curtly and hung up before they could press further. I didn't think about it. I couldn't. Every time I replayed the conversation in my head, all I felt was anger. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a backup plan, a safety net for when things went wrong. The final straw came a few weeks later. It was a slow night at the restaurant, and I was in the back office going over invoices when Aunt Valerie called. Ryan, I just saw something, and I think you need to see it too, she said, her voice uncharacteristically tense. What is it? It's a video from the last family party your parents went to. Someone posted it online. I'm sending you the link now. My stomach churned as I opened the link. The video was shaky, taken on someone's phone, but it was clear enough. My parents stood in the middle of the room, drinks in hand, laughing as they talked. Ryan's little business is doing so well, Mom said, her voice slurred. But let's be honest, he wouldn't have gotten anywhere without us. Dad smirked and nodded. That's right. We gave him the money to get started, and Lauren practically ran the place for him. He owes everything to us. I stared at the screen, unable to believe what I was hearing. They weren't just lying. They were rewriting history, erasing everything I'd worked so hard for. And you know, Mom continued, giggling, he acts like he's so independent, but we all know the truth. He'd still be struggling if it weren't for us. The room burst into laughter, and my stomach dropped. I felt a mix of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. How could they do this? How could they stand there, in front of our family and friends, and tear me down like that? My hands were shaking as I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice chipper. Hi, sweetie. What a nice surprise. I saw the video, I said coldly. There was a pause. What video? The one where you and Dad tell everyone you funded my business and that Lauren's the reason I'm successful, I snapped. Oh, Ryan, that was just a joke, she said, her tone suddenly defensive. We were having fun and… You called me a freeloader, I interrupted, my voice rising. You stood there and took credit for everything I've built. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? I worked my ass off for this. You didn't give me a dime, and Lauren couldn't even handle being a hostess for 2 months. And now you want to act like you're the reason I'm successful? Ryan, you're overreacting, she said, her voice wavering. We're proud of you. You know that. No, I said firmly. You don't get to claim pride in something you had nothing to do with. I'm done, Mom. Don't call me, don't ask me for money, and don't involve me in your drama. We're done. Ryan, wait. I hung up before she could finish. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at my phone. I felt drained, like I'd been carrying a weight for years and finally set it down. It wasn't relief exactly, but it was something close. When Aunt Valerie called later to check on me, I told her what had happened. I'm proud of you, Ryan, she said softly. That took courage. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. I'd built something real, and no one could take that away from me. After I cut ties with my parents, I expected to feel guilty, but instead, I felt free. For the first time in years, there was no constant weight on my shoulders, no nagging voice in the back of my head telling me I had to fix their problems or prove my worth. It was like a switch had flipped, and I could finally focus on my own life without looking over my shoulder. The silence from them was deafening at first. I kept waiting for my mom to call or for my dad to show up at the restaurant, demanding an explanation, but they didn't. A few weeks later, I got a text from Lauren. Mom's upset. She says you're being dramatic. Call her. I ignored it. Meanwhile, the business continued to thrive. Night bites had become a staple in the community, and I'd started thinking about expanding to another city. I threw myself into the work, finding comfort in the chaos of running a business. It wasn't easy, long hours, constant stress, and a never-ending list of things to do, but it was mine. Every time I walked into one of the kitchens, I felt a sense of pride that nothing could touch. Aunt Valerie came by the restaurant one evening to check in. She always did that, popping in unannounced with a bag of cookies or a casserole she swore was too big for just her. That night, she brought homemade mac and cheese and a bottle of wine. "Still holding up?" she asked as she settled into the seat across from me in the office. "Yeah," I said, cracking open the bottle. "Honestly, I think I'm doing better than I've ever been." She smiled, that familiar warmth in her eyes. "I'm glad to hear that, Ryan. You deserve it." We spent the evening talking about everything but my parents, new menu ideas, funny customer stories, her neighbor's ridiculous garden gnome collection. It was the most at peace I'd felt in a long time. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, my mom's. For a moment, I considered tossing it in the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and unfolded the paper, scanning the neat rows of her handwriting. "Ryan, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know we've made mistakes, more than I can count, and I know I wasn't the mother you needed. Your father and I didn't realize how much we hurt you, and for that, I'm truly sorry. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and you're right. You built your life on your own, and we didn't support you the way we should have. I'm proud of you, Ryan, more than I've ever said. I hope, one day, you can forgive us. Love, Mom." I read the letter twice, then set it on my desk. Her words felt genuine, but they didn't erase years of neglect or the lies she'd told. Part of me wanted to respond, to reach out and give her the chance to make things right. Another part of me wasn't ready to let her back in. Instead of answering, I tucked the letter into a drawer and left it there. The next few months flew by as I worked on opening a new location in the neighboring city. It was the biggest risk I'd taken since starting Night Bites, and it consumed most of my time and energy. But seeing the grand opening come together was worth every sleepless night. On opening day, Aunt Valerie showed up with a bouquet of flowers and the same proud smile she'd had at my college graduation. "You've done it again," she said, hugging me tightly. "Couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "Of course you could have," she said, laughing, "but I'm glad I got to watch." As we stood there, watching the line of customers snake out the door, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. My parents didn't show up, and I didn't expect them to. Lauren didn't call, and that was fine too. For the first time, I didn't feel the need for their validation. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be seen, trying to measure up to impossible standards, and now I realized I didn't have to. I had built something real, something meaningful, and the people who mattered were the ones who'd stood by me all along. Aunt Valerie, my team, my friends, they were my family now.